Emergency electrical configuration. Technical background. The emergency electrical configuration is due to the loss of AC bus 1 and 2. The ram air turbine extends automatically. This powers the blue hydraulic circuit which drives the emergency generator. The emergency generator supplies both AC and DC essential bus. When the ram air turbine stalls and the emergency generator is no longer able to supply both AC and DC essential bus, the emergency generation network is automatically transferred to the batteries and the AC shed essential and DC shed essential bus are shed. Below 100 knot, the DC BAT bus is automatically connected, and below 50 knot, the AC essential bus is shed. General guidelines. As only PFD1 is available, the left-hand seat pilot becomes PF. Once a safe flight path is established, and the aircraft is under control, ECAM actions will be carried out. This is a serious emergency and ATC should be notified using appropriate phraseology, Mayday. Although the ECAM displays Land ASAP in red, it would be unwise to attempt an approach at a poorly equipped airfield in marginal weather. However, prolonged flight in this configuration is not recommended. AP, FD and autothrust are lost. The flight is to be completed manually in alternate and then, when gear down, in direct law. Crews should be aware that workload is immediately greatly increased. As only the EWD is available, disciplined use of the ECAM control panel is essential. Consideration should be given to starting the APU as indicated by the ECAM and taking into account the probability to restore using a PU generator. A clear reading of status is essential to assess the aircraft status and properly sequence actions during the approach. The handling of this failure is referred to as a complex procedure. A summary for handling the procedure is included in the QRH, which will be referred to upon completion of the ECAM procedure. The Electrical Emergency Config System remaining list is available in QRH. When landing gear is down, flight control law reverts to direct law. The approach speed must be at least minimum ram air turbine speed 140 knot to keep the emergency generator supplying the electrical network. The BSCU are lost. Consequently, the nose wheel steering and anti-skid are lost. Alternate braking with yellow hydraulic pressure modulation up to 1000 psi will be used. Additionally, reversers are not available. RA 1 and 2 are lost with their associated call-out. Call-out will be made by PM. Approaching 50 knot during the landing roll, all display units will be lost. Landing with abnormal landing gear. To avoid unnecessary application of the landing gear gravity extension and the landing with abnormal landing gear QRH procedures, the flight crew must check for the green indications of the 3 landing gears on the ECAM wheel SD page. At least one green triangle on each landing gear is sufficient to indicate that the landing gear is down and locked. The flight crew must also rely on the landing gear down memo. This is sufficient to confirm that the landing gear is down locked. If one landing gear is not down locked, the flight crew must perform the landing with abnormal landing gear QRH procedure. In this case, it is always better to land with any available gear rather than carry out a landing without any gear. In all cases, weight should be reduced as much as possible to provide the slowest possible touchdown speed. A fuel imbalance may be considered by the flight crew. Landing with a lighter wing on the affected side allows to keep it up longer and delay the moment of nacelle contact. If the imbalance advisory triggers, the flight crew can disregard it, as the aircraft handling qualities are not significantly affected. Although foaming of the runway is not a requirement, full advantage should be taken of any ATC offer to do so. The passengers and cabin crew should be informed of the situation in good time. This will allow the cabin crew to prepare the cabin and perform their emergency landing and evacuation procedures. If one or both main landing gears are in abnormal position, the ground spoilers will not be armed to keep as much roll authority as possible to maintain the wings level. Ground spoiler extension would prevent spoilers from acting as roll surfaces. The flight crew will not arm the auto brake, as manual braking will enable better pitch and roll control. Furthermore, with at least one main landing gear in the abnormal position, the auto brake cannot be activated. Ground spoilers not armed. With one main landing gear not extended, the reference speed used by the anti-skid system is not correctly initialized. Consequently, the anti-skid must be switched off to prevent permanent brake release. In all cases, a normal approach should be flown and control surfaces used as required to maintain the aircraft in a normal attitude for as long as possible after touchdown. The flight crew should perform the following actions. At any time, maintain runway axis. At first touchdown, prevent nacelle impact. During rollout, maintain wing level with roll control as long as possible. When the nacelle touches the surface, use rudder control and differential braking at lower speed to maintain runway axis. The recommendations to set the engine masters to off are as follows. If nose landing gear abnormal, before nose impact. If one main landing gear abnormal, at touchdown. If both main landing gear abnormal, during the flare, before touchdown. This ensures that the fuel is cut off before nacelle touchdown. The engine hydraulic pumps continue to supply sufficient hydraulic pressure for approximately 30 seconds after engine shutdown. If one main landing gear is in abnormal position, the reversers will not be used to prevent the ground spoilers extension. If the nose landing gear is in abnormal position, the reversers will not be used to prevent the nose down effect induced by the reverse thrust. The engines and APU fire push button are pushed when the use of flight controls is no longer required, such as when aircraft has stopped. Nose wheel steering fault. If the nose wheel steering is lost for taxiing, the flight crew can steer the aircraft with differential braking technique. If the flight crew does not have experience with this technique, he should preferably request a towing to return to the gate. The flight crew can request the towing early in approach, if the failure has been triggered in flight. Taxi with deflated or damaged tires. In some abnormal situations, after a rejected takeoff or after landing, the flight crew may need to vacate the runway and taxi the aircraft with deflated or damaged tires. The flight crew must ensure that the number and position of deflated or damaged tires are in accordance with the limitations provided in the FCOM. In order to identify the number and position of the affected tires, the flight crew can use the tire pressure indication available on the wheel SD page. If the number or position of the affected tires is not in accordance with the limitations provided in the FCOM, the ground crew must change a sufficient number of wheels before taxi, in order to ensure compliance with the FCOM limitations. As indicated in the FCOM limitations, The nosewheel steering angle must be limited to a maximum of 30 degrees. In order to ensure that this limitation is not exceeded, the flight crew should use the graduations available on the steering handwheel. The 30-degree limitation for the nosewheel steering angle corresponds to either of the following: a steering handwheel position on the third graduation, or a steering handwheel position in the middle of the second and third graduation with pedals fully deflected in the same direction. Cabin pressure excess cabin altitude. If the cabin pressure excess cabin altitude triggers above flight level 160, the flight crew should first apply the emergency descent memory items, and then perform the ECAM procedure. The first steps of the ECAM procedure recall the memory items. If the cabin pressure excess cabin altitude triggers below flight level 160, the flight crew should apply the ECAM procedure, and initiate a normal descent.